Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cecilia Vila, and I'm the current NJTESOL-NJBE president. I am incredibly privileged to salute you from this end of the screen. NJTESOL-NJBE is sponsoring this event in partnership with Stockton. And to that end, I'm introducing Dr. Hakias, who will be the host and master of ceremonies for this event today.
Thank you, Cecilia. And also along with my colleague, Dr. Kate Worley, who is also here in attendance. Hi, Kate. So welcome everybody to our panel discussion on building trauma-informed resilience in the classroom with the STAHR Framework. And I do want to remind everybody, if you joined in, that this session is being recorded. And if you have any questions and answers, unfortunately, we do not have time. We have a very full schedule with our panelists, but you can certainly put your questions in the chat, which will be saved and will be forwarded to me. At the end of our discussion tonight, you will see a slide with the QR to our Padlet resources, also this presentation, and also my email address. So if you have any specific questions more broadly about this or about a specific panelist, please make sure that you go ahead and email me and we can hopefully get back to you as soon as we can. So welcome everybody. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Maria Halkias. I'm assistant professor at Stockton University. I work within the School of Education, supporting the Masters of Arts in Education program, our MAED program. I teach courses related to TESOL and bilingual education, endorsements in New Jersey. But prior to joining Stockton University, I spent more than 2 decades working with culturally and linguistically diverse students in both public and private school settings. And throughout my career, I've served as a reading specialist and a classroom teacher, working with students from kindergarten through middle school. I also served as a preschool director, where I supported preschool teachers and collaborated with their families and more broadly the community to promote higher quality early childhood education. My professional experience has focused on supporting multilingual learners and fostering equitable educational opportunities for diverse student populations. And Kate?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. So I'm an assistant professor of counseling at Stockton University. I'm teaching in our Master's of Counseling program with students who are seeking licensure to be a professional counselor in the state of New Jersey. I'm also a licensed professional counselor in the states of Tennessee and Pennsylvania and a registered play therapist. So I specialize in working with children and their families with a variety of presenting concerns, including adoption, trauma, anxiety, and behavioral issues. My passion for this topic and population began several years ago when working for a nonprofit serving the needs of the refugee population in Nashville, Tennessee. While my job focused on teaching elementary and middle school age children English, I became more passionate about meeting the emotional needs of my students, and this led me to pursue education in clinical mental health counseling.
Thank you, Dr. Worley. We're very excited. We do have a full list of 10 panelists, and they will each be speaking for about 8 to 10 minutes. And like I said, we do not have time for individual questions after the discussion. However, you can email me. And certainly, if you have something specific question for any one of these panelists, just make sure that you take a look at our resource on Padlet for their names and information. So thank you. What we also want to do is within the Padlet of resources, you will see a list of shared understandings and vocabulary. Even though I'm not going over this tonight, you can certainly take a look at it and it will be in our Padlet of resources. So empty seats, silence, and silos, these words tell the story of what too many teachers are facing alone in the classroom where fear has become a familiar part of the daily routine. This is immigration trauma, the trauma of a child, a classroom, and the community as a whole, regardless of immigration status. We must start to acknowledge this reality and build something better from it. There has been a persistent push recently for innovation where new initiatives arrive in seminars and checklists, only to disappear with the changing of the winds. What these initiatives often fail to achieve is the development of supporting environment for teacher efficacy and student well-being. While it is easy for school professional learning initiatives, they rarely invest in a process to make them successful and sustainable. As a daughter of immigrants, this is not an abstract topic for me. I grew up living in a version of this experience that now besets our classrooms, and the numbers tell us those classrooms are changing quickly. So by 2030, immigration in the US is projected to be the primary source of population growth. And according to the US Census Bureau, 14% of American residents were born outside the country, with an additional 12% of Americans having at least one foreign-born parent. The immigration population reflects considerable generational diversity, ranging from newly arrived immigrants to families who have been in the U.S. for many generations. And for teachers in the U.S. working directly with students who have experienced immigration-related trauma, this is a growing reality, one of that our classrooms already reflect. So teachers are also working to support students who are navigating daily experiences of anxiety and fear and the ongoing threat of immigration enforcement. Notably, immigration enforcement affects all students, immigrant and U.S.-born alike. As empty seats serve as daily reminders of missing students, increasing fear and disrupting learning for those who remain in the classroom. Increasing visible immigration enforcement activity is particularly concerning for newcomers. Schools play an important role in supporting these newcomers, but the local schools frequently lack district and state level training in terms of trauma-informed practices that can be most effective in serving this portion of the school population. And research shows that intentional collaboration across fields strengthens educational practice in their classrooms. So Wong and Wong in 2026 proposes that mental health interventions be tailored by generation as newcomers, second generation students, and later generation students from minoritized backgrounds each bring experiences of trauma, stress, and identity into the classroom. And to address these myriad needs, they further recommend that school-based interventions be delivered through a step care model or tiered system of support that provides various levels of support based on the assessed level of student need. So consequently, a one-size approach to instruction or support will likely miss those students who most need the help. So when educators ignore or minimize the impact of trauma on their students, they undermine the well-being of their students, classrooms, and broader school community. So through my working with educators pursuing a certification in English as a second language and bilingual education, I have come to understand that one facet of my role is to highlight the incredible work already happening in the classroom, to try to amplify the voices rather than silence them, while providing my students with concrete examples of how their work can best be done in practice. The classroom level reality is clear, and educators cannot address that academic and mental health needs of students experience immigration trauma in isolation. So this is what supportive trauma-informed approaches for humanizing resilience framework, or STAHR, was built to do. And the STAHR framework has three primary goals: focusing on student resilience, sustaining education well-being, and strengthening the connection between the student and educator. And these goals build upon trauma-informed approaches, relational practices, and meaningful human connections that effective teachers are already doing and bring to their classroom daily. And second, this framework prioritizes the well-being of both teachers and students while also contributing and combating the culture of professional isolation, affirming that this work belongs to the entire community, not to solitary individuals working in silos. And finally, the STAHR framework provides a structure that recognizes and builds on what teachers already know and are already doing, while addressing the unique complexities of U.S. immigration and migration. Teachers already know what trauma looks like and even perhaps be living with it within themselves. And from my experience, it's easiest when I hear a child's voice ask me simply and purely, how can you help me get through this? How can you help me understand this? And the question is not whether our students need the support. The question is whether we are willing to stay along enough to see it through. And so thank you. Dr. Kate Worley will detail the mental health components of the STAR pilot we are currently designing.
Thank you. Dr. Hawk, yes, can you advance the slide?
Sure.
Thank you. All right, perfect. So I think most of us know a lot about the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, and it's been highly researched and is well known. But as a refresher, what we know as adverse childhood experiences include experiences that a child can have during their childhood, which could be violence, abuse, or neglect. This could be witnessing violence in the home or the community, having a family member attempt or die by suicide. This also includes aspects of the child's environment that can undermine their sense of safety, stability, and bonding. This could include growing up in a household with substance use problems, mental health issues, instability due to parental separation, or instability due to household members being in jail or in prison. So, what we know about ACEs is that it doesn't just cause psychological harm. They can have lasting effects on health and well-being in childhood and life opportunities for people, such as their education and job potential, well into adulthood. Some experiences that are correlated to ACEs can include risks for maternal or child health problems, including higher rates of teen pregnancy, pregnancy complications, and fetal death. Also included are a range of chronic diseases which can cause death, such as cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and suicide. So this is due to living with chronic and toxic stress, which impacts not only a person's psychology, but their biology as well. So children who are newcomers or multilingual learners, they may obviously experience ACEs, but a lot of times they're experiencing additional stress related to their own experiences. For example, when working with a child who's a refugee or asylum seeker, they may have experienced additional traumatic stress, including war, violence, or detention. There's likely resettlement stress with their parents managing finances and finding housing. There's usually acculturation stress, which can include learning how to fit into a new culture or having extra responsibilities like having to translate for a family member. And then isolation, which could be a result of discrimination or having a felt of a lack of belonging. So, due to chronic stress, we often see this manifest differently for children, and this can happen a lot in the classroom. But usually, we see that they're in a constant state of hypervigilance, and they often show that through emotional dysregulation. So, this would be the children with big emotions and behaviors in the classroom. Some children also go the opposite way, though, and they show their dysregulation by shutting down or experiencing hypoarousal. Dr. Halkias, can you advance the slide? Okay, thank you. So, a newer concept, again, I think we know a lot about ACEs, but a newer concept is focusing on positive childhood experiences. And this has a lot of positive impact on children and also can act as a buffer for children who are experiencing adverse childhood experiences. And the STAR framework really focuses on enhancing those positive childhood experiences in the classroom. Positive childhood experiences include a variety of criteria, including being able to talk to family about feelings, feeling understood by family during difficult times, being able to participate in community traditions, having a sense of felt belonging in school, feeling supported by friends, having two non-parent adults who take genuine interest in them, and then feeling safe and protected by an adult in their home. So studies do show that positive childhood experiences have many positive effects. In a recent study, researchers found that participants with higher PCEs were less likely to have mental health problems, including depression. And this was done in 2015 on an adult population in Wisconsin. And so, what we're focused on in the STAR framework is helping educators and school administration be part of creating a safe environment in the school. So one way that educators can do that is just making sure that children have their basic needs met. For example, is there a free or reduced breakfast or lunch at the school that they can connect children to? Also focusing on creating a safe space in the classroom by enhancing healthy relationships for the child. It's important to connect the child to other healthy adults, for example, coaches, support staff, after school programs, a school counselor. Also addressing emotional safety in the classroom by addressing bullying or teasing. What we know is that teachers, in addition to education, are playing a big role in helping, especially younger children, learn how to regulate. And children experiencing chronic stress often need a lot of help with co-regulation. So, what teachers can do to help with dysregulation is, before a child has a meltdown, assisting with building emotional literacy in the classroom by helping them identify and communicate feelings, creating calm down zones, and providing ample opportunities for emotional check ins. While a child is having dysregulation, providing space to listen to the child and understand if there's an underlying need, and giving the child an option to regulate together by deep breathing together, or maybe giving the child an opportunity for a break. And then after the incident, just assisting the child and helping them processing the event. So, as Dr. Halkias has probably said, this is just a little snapshot of STAR. It's something that we're still working on. But for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and move forward and introduce our first panelist. So, the first couple of panelists will discuss understanding the landscape of trauma. And it's my pleasure to introduce our first panelist, who is Mr. David Nash. And he currently serves as the Director of Legal Education and National Outreach for the Foundation for Educational Administration. His responsibilities include coordinating the efforts of Foundation for Educational Administration to promote its wide array of professional learning courses, events, programs, and services nationally. Mr. Nash is also responsible for overseeing legal education through the Legal One program. And so, Mr. Nash, my question for you is, what are the existing legal protections under federal and state law that define a school's duty of care for all students, regardless of immigration status, and how can educators confidently act within those protections? More importantly, what do school leaders and educators need to know about federal and state law to ensure that every student's right to a safe and uninterrupted education is upheld, and how has recent, if any, New Jersey guidance helped clarify those responsibilities?
Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you for introducing this important set of issues. As I am doing my work in trying to help folks understand the law on so many of these topics, um, at the grassroots level, it is so crucial for us to understand that framework and how we can support students. So, my pleasure to have a chance to be part of this discussion. Why don't we advance to our next slide? It is important to recognize that it feels like so many things have changed at the federal level and across the nation that we might start assuming that some things have changed that haven't. All children have the right to a public education, and that is regardless of any questions around citizenship status. Some of the media coverage that's happening across the nation might have us questioning that and whether that's still true. But we have a landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision that established this back in 1982. So the right for all individuals to have that access to a public education is clearly defined. And in New Jersey, our State Department of Education every year sends out very helpful guidance to the field, reminding school leaders and educators that that obligation does exist. And of course, we do not ask questions about immigration status as part of creating that environment. Next slide. We know that when a family first interacts with a school district, that first interaction is very important. It's important for it to feel welcoming for that family, for that student to feel like they're coming into an environment that is excited and happy that they're there. So during that enrollment process, we have seen school districts, often without any bad intentions, sometimes asking for information that they should not be asking for. That really is a roundabout way of asking somebody to prove their citizenship status. And so we shouldn't be asking for documents like a driver's license or requiring somebody to provide a social security number, or doing anything that leaves the impression that you need to prove to the school district your citizenship status. And sometimes we will have school administrators who understand that very well, but the first point of contact might be somebody working in the main office who may not have been trained on those issues around documentation and what is and is not appropriate. We also know that if students are coming from other countries or even other states, they do have some additional time to provide some important records. So when we're talking about records around, for example, immunization status, school districts should not use that as a barrier for enrollment for a child coming into a school district. Sometimes it's not so easy to get those records from another country or even another state. So we should still be provisionally enrolling that child and giving the family that 30-day period. If we think that there is an issue around somebody's right to be in a school district, and maybe we're not quite sure that the child and family really reside there, there's a process that's followed. So even if a school district had some reason to believe that this child or family isn't really residing here, they're in a neighboring town, if that's their theory, um, you still enroll that child. You still enroll that child and start educating that child right away. And there is a formal process for the school district to follow if they think there is a question. And then, of course, if the school district thinks a child doesn't have a right to be in their school district, that child and their family or guardian have the right to appeal that decision the entire time that child is in the district. If we have a child who's homeless, we immediately enroll that child, regardless of whether the child has immunization records or other records immediately available. And we, in every school district, have a liaison that helps that family. So we have to be mindful of these issues. Within this presentation, we include links around questions of documentation and what is and is not appropriate. No district should be rigidly saying you need to provide these 2 or 3 forms of documentation or you can't enroll. That would create a legal issue and a constitutional issue. So next slide. We do need to prepare for some difficult situations that could occur in our schools. And the state of New Jersey, I do have to stress, has been proactive on these issues at trying to help school districts think through what we should do if immigration enforcement authorities show up at a school. So it's important to recognize that federal immigration officials do not, in the vast majority of cases, have a right to simply enter a school building and start looking for a particular student. Generally speaking, without a court order signed by a judge, you would not have federal immigration enforcement officials or other law enforcement officials just coming into a building. There are exceptions built into our federal and state laws if there's an emergency situation. But frankly, it's hard to imagine those exigent circumstances really existing if the issues are around a student or family's immigration status. The child chose to come to school that day. In the vast majority of situations, there's no reason to think that they're going to be fleeing that environment. So it is important if there are attempts for immigration enforcement officials to try to enter a school, for school officials to be trained on what to do and to get that issue very quickly up the chain of command to the school principal, to the superintendent. And I think in almost all cases, the superintendent will want to get to the school board attorney to make sure that if somebody is claiming they have the right to come into a building, they really do. We just haven't seen that, but we do need to be prepared for that issue. And staff that are the first line of interaction with a student and family are on the front line. Those initial impressions are critical. If we made a mistake and allowed immigration enforcement or other law enforcement officials into a building when they shouldn't have, in many ways, the horse is out of the barn at that point. You've let that person into the building, and it becomes much more difficult to address their unauthorized access. So we want to get that right up front. New Jersey law has been revised recently as well. It now prohibits masked law enforcement agents from operating in schools in New Jersey. And we have seen masked ICE officials across the country. That is prohibited in the state of New Jersey. So if we see that happening, we know that is not authorized law enforcement functioning here in New Jersey. So the state of New Jersey does have some very good guidance on these issues that we do provide a link to. Next slide. If we do run into an issue with somebody trying to physically access school premises, we need to think through what will we do in those situations? How do we respond? And there is very good guidance on this issue right now, but there will be even more. The state attorney general is legally required to put out additional guidance to school districts that is due by this summer to provide more support to understand what to do in these situations. But certainly, if somebody is presenting credentials and claiming they have a right to enter school buildings, we need to verify them. And it shouldn't be, in almost all cases, somebody who's simply at the front desk being the person who's verifying those credentials. That needs to get quickly up the chain of command, as I said, to superintendent and board attorney. Generally speaking, if somebody is giving you what looks like official paperwork, but it's not actually a court order signed by a judge, it's an administrative warrant that could be issued by immigration enforcement agencies. That is not the same. So that's why we need the expertise of your school board attorney looking at that documentation to understand whether this truly is giving somebody access to that school facility. We also have to think through what do we do for our outside facilities. Children might be outside on a playground when immigration enforcement officials approach a school. It might be that a school needs to go into their lockdown procedures when you have an unverified person claiming to be immigration enforcement or other law enforcement without having their credentials verified. You need to be prepared. So it's just important for us to understand that and to be ready for the enhanced guidance that's coming this summer. Next slide. We do have recently signed laws that certainly do strengthen what is already a very strong commitment in New Jersey to supporting all of our students. So the Safe Communities Act was signed by Governor Murphy on his last day in office, January 20th. And it does require some additional guidance for school officials. One part of that guidance that will be very important is identifying what schools mean by public spaces that anybody can go in and what are non-public spaces. So one of the concepts that we really need to understand is defining what is a non-public space, and it might be more than the physical confines of a building. It might be that during the school day, that playground that is outside is a non-public space, and you have signs indicating that's a non-public space from 8 a.m. till 3:30 p.m. And then it is available for public use beyond those hours. So those are very important next level conversations that need to happen in all school districts really this summer so that we can clearly establish where immigration enforcement or other officials would have the right to be. If it's a public space, they would have the right to be there just like anybody else from the public. New Jersey does have a series of laws that were enacted, chapters 3, 4, and 5 this year, that talk about immigration officials not being an agent of local and state law enforcement. So we're not going to have situations where state law enforcement or local are working with immigration enforcement officials. That's not their job. As I mentioned, we also have a very clear prohibition on wearing a mask when law enforcement is interacting with the public. So what we have seen in other states should not be happening on that issue in New Jersey. Next slide. Sometimes we will have school officials who are acting in the interest of a child, are doing everything they can to make sure that child is supported. And generally speaking, if a child is sharing important information that can help you support that child, we want to write that down. But we need to be thoughtful about what we write down. Federal law and state law do not in any way require school officials to document somebody's immigration status. And in fact, we are prohibited from even asking that question. But a student might volunteer the information, might tell a counselor, might tell an administrator or a teacher that information. We should not be writing that down. We should be thinking through how we can communicate with each other as staff members and support that child, of course, and the family. But there's no need to document that information in writing. That does create the threat that there could be an order to turn that information over at some later date. So we want to be thoughtful about still being supportive without creating formal documents that we don't need to create. Next slide. When it comes to accessing school records, it is important for us to understand the very strong laws that we have in place to protect student confidentiality. So we want to make sure that we're not accidentally sharing information that we shouldn't. We also want to make sure on the positive side that we are proactively sharing information that can be helpful. So if a student is dealing with various traumas and the family is sharing information about that, it can be very useful for a school administrator to have some pieces of that information, for a counselor to have some pieces of that information. It needs to just be a thoughtful process. We can't simply share information because we needed to unload about our difficult day as a staff member. So reminding staff members that there always has to be a legal basis, a legitimate educational reason why we're sharing sensitive information. And again, I don't expect most staff members to be experts on court orders and subpoenas, but your board attorney is. So when you have somebody presenting documents claiming that they now have legal authority to get access to records or kids, you don't want to assume that's true. You want to get that very quickly up the chain of command so the board attorney can analyze that information. And frankly, if somebody is asking for access to a record, our state records law says the parents or guardians of that child have to get 3 days notice in advance before we share those records with any outside agency or entity. Next slide. I know this is very fast. I was quickly going through some information. So we do include here a link to our website. Legal One obviously provides lots of training on this and many other issues. And if you have questions, you see our email address as well.
Thank you, Mr. David Nash, for all that helpful information, and that will be listed in the Padlet of resources at the end of our workshop. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
And once again, this information that you have
Yep.
shared be there as well. So thank you. I'm honored to introduce our next panelist number 2, Dr. Joanna Drebe. She's a professor in the Department of Sociology, University of Albany, SUNY. Joanna's research explores family dynamics under conditions of increased globalization with specific expertise on international migration, gender, and children. She is an author of 2 award-winning books, Divided by Borders, Mexican Migrants and Their Children, and Everyday Illegal When Policies Undermine Immigrant Families. And also her current book is Surviving the Ice Age, Children of Immigrants in New York. Dr. Drebe has published more than 35 peer-reviewed journals and articles and book chapters on a range of topics, including child care fatalities, transnational families, gender, and generational policies on children. So thank you, Dr. Drebe. My question for you is, given your research on how globalization and migration reshape family structures, what are the invisible pressures that immigrant children carry into the classroom that educators might mistake for academic or behavioral issues?
Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It's wonderful to be among a group of educators because although I am an educator in higher education, my research as a social scientist really focuses on qualitative and ethnographic methods that center children and families. Not really education systems, but we all know, I think, who are here, that what happens in families does affect children's lives in schools. So today I'm going to start with a little background, as you can see on the slide, and I'll explain it in a minute. And then I'm going to share from my research 3 ways that immigration policies affect children at home through changes to their households, through changes to children's roles and responsibilities in those households, and through fears and silencing practices. And then I'll end with some comments on how educators can support resiliency among children from what I call these forms of disruptions to their home lives. So just to warn you, in the interest of time, I'm going to talk through quickly, but I do have several slides with quotes on them, so you can read them on your own. So in 2025, as David mentioned, Immigration Customs Enforcement, or ICE, has acted in many unprecedented ways, as has been reported in the media. And so I think it's important to think about this history because these actions do not materialize out of thin air. It can be easy to forget that it was not until 2003 that the Department of Homeland Security was founded and that ICE became an agency charged with enforcement in the interior of the United States. Now, prior to this, INS and Border Patrol previously also deported people. But it was not until ICE was formed that I think we see such widespread and, very importantly, intergenerational effects in states like New York and New Jersey that are very far from the US-Mexican border, where previously enforcement practices had concentrated. So as you can see in these graphs that I put up, removals, which is just one measure of enforcement, grew precipitously, really starting in the mid-1990s and doubled between the year 2000 and 2010. In fact, I still remember the moment when this data became publicly available and I found it and I had this aha moment. No wonder all these children I was interviewing at the time were telling me that they were afraid of what they called police ICE, because removals at that time had doubled. Next slide, please. So more recently, we can see that there was a drop in removals due to the COVID pandemic shutdowns, but then all indications of increases ever since, and likely the 2025 data and beyond will show further increases. So I am among many social scientists who've really been following and tracking how children have fared during this period of an increase in enforcement activities. And I can share that there's strong, accumulating, and really irrefutable evidence that enforcement activities cause harm for children living in the United States, regardless of their immigration status. There are studies, for example, that correlate exposure to enforcement in families with internalizing and externalizing behaviors and with anxiety presently, but also later on in life. There are other studies that look at things like school attendance and motivation, and I think these are the types of things educators may notice in their classrooms. So I now want to point out 3 consequences for family systems, which I describe as disruptions because they're likely to affect children in more subtle and less visible ways, excuse me. And I think this idea of disruptions is very useful because educators and others working with children and youth can act in ways that can lessen disruptions in children's lives. Next slide, please. So the first way enforcement disrupts children's lives is through changes to their households. In some cases, a parent may leave temporarily or permanently due to a deportation, and I think that's the most obvious type of family separation. But that's not the only way that households change following enforcement. There may be people moving in and out of children's households following what I like to call enforcement episodes, which is an actual or a threat of an immigration arrest, detention, or removal. And children may move repeatedly to new places because of economic instability following an enforcement episode. So let me share just one scenario that illustrates how disruptions to households can spiral into major disruptions to children's schooling. I interviewed a 23-year-old young woman whose father was deported to the Dominican Republic when she was just 1 year old. So she doesn't really remember having lived together with him in the family household. But she did remember very clearly the day a few years later when the family was evicted. After the eviction, her mother moved in with her grandmother for 2 years, and then she moved to her father's hometown in the Dominican Republic for 1.5 years. And then she came back to New York to live with her mother from ages 10 to 12. Eventually, she moved out of state with one uncle and then with another aunt and uncle for her final 3 years of high school. All told, she had moved 5 times in elementary school alone because of the way that initial deportation when she was just 1 had destabilized her mother both emotionally and economically. Next slide, please. A second way that enforcement disrupts children's lives is by causing changes to their roles and responsibilities. This can include things like translating for parents, going to lawyers' appointments, and even attending immigration court. Now, children raised in immigrant families often do this work anyway. It's what scholars call brokering. And there's a lot of literature on this. But enforcement episodes often drastically alter this work in especially stressful ways. For example, one young woman I interviewed recalled that helping her mother was bewildering because she did not understand the legal documents that she had to translate for her mother. These stressors are often things that children keep to themselves. In another scenario, a 21-year-old daughter of Guatemalans told me that for most of her life, she had not worried about her parents' legal status. But when she was 14, things changed when her family learned that the lawyer they consulted had been charged with defrauding immigrants. Previously, her parents, who she described as being quote unquote very protective, had never involved her in their immigration case, but suddenly she felt quote unquote very protective of them. So in this case, there was no removal, there was no deportation, but the pressure to take care of her parents accumulated over time. Although all of her best friends were children of immigrants, she didn't share these problems with anyone outside of her family until one day when she was having a really bad day at her track and field practice, and the coach actually noticed. She found herself confessing about her parents' immigration case for the first time to someone outside of the family. She told me, "I told him everything and started crying, and then I started my hill sprints again." Next slide, please. A third way enforcement disrupts children's lives is through fears and silencing practices. When I was collecting interviews with young children in 2010 and 2011, I was taken aback by the words the youngest children I met used to express this, as these quotes from children who I interviewed in New Jersey illustrate. Children, I also learned, managed information about family members' migrations. In New Jersey, a 10-year-old boy told me he didn't want anyone to know his parents were born in Mexico because it could spread rumors around the school. And a 12-year-old told me that she only wanted friends that could keep secrets well to know that her mother was born in Mexico. Next slide, please. The interviews with young adults that I've collected more recently attest to how these silencing practices can balloon over time. Young adults I met later in life said they knew little about their parents' migration stories. One young woman shared that her parents never talked about migration or immigration. All she knew was, quote, that we came from Mexico and we didn't have papers. She laughed, explaining, "I did a Google search to figure out what that means." Remarkably, silencing practices ran so deep that they could result in missing childhood memories about enforcement episodes. A 19-year-old daughter of a deportee explained, "I never spoke about it, I never thought about it, I repressed it." Next slide, please. In conclusion, there are important ways that educators can support children during this era of enforcement to help build resiliency facing disruptions to children's households. Enforcement is a problem due to fears and silencing. So firstly, we can talk about migration as a human process. This seems subtle, but it is very important to counter criminalizing narratives with normalizing ones, especially when children feel the pressure to be silent about their own experiences. Second, we can assess levels of disruption to children's lives and consider them to be warning signs signaling the need for support. Imagine how that schooling trajectory of the young woman who I first mentioned in the first scenario could have been different had the family received rental support and not been evicted after her father's deportation when she was young. Things might have looked very different for her. Third, we can offer interventions directly to children. Now, I did not have time to talk about this more today, but my research suggests that over time, children fare better when they have access to information and support services to handle situations tied to enforcement episodes. This does not always happen at home because parents want to protect their children and often do not share information with them. But educators can fill the gap. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jarby, for all of that information. It's my pleasure to introduce our next panelist, Miss Amanda Adams. Ms. Adams currently works as an Associate Director of Professional Development and Instructional Issues at the New Jersey Education Association, where she coordinated the NJEA Access Model, a statewide initiative focused on improving learning environments, expanding teacher leadership, and strengthening school community connections. Amanda Adams is dedicated to creating healing-centered, equitable school communities where educators and students can thrive. With almost 30 years of experience in education, she brings deep expertise in teaching, coaching, facilitation, and systems design. She earned her BA in psychology and Spanish from the University of Virginia and an MA in school leadership from New York University. She is a certified master trainer in understanding trauma and holds a certification in healing-centered engagement. Her expertise is in understanding trauma through neuroscience, epigenetics, and the ACEs study, also building resilience through the core protective systems and healing-centered engagement. My question for you is, research on adverse childhood experiences and epigenetics shows us that trauma is not only a psychological experience, it is biological and intergenerational. What is an ACE, and how should this understanding reshape the way educators interpret student behavior in the classroom? And what does healing-centered engagement look like in a school community where immigration-related fear is an ongoing daily reality? Oh, I think you're on mute.
I am, because I'm new
No,
to this
no
and
worries.
stuff. I just wanted to say thank you for having me here tonight. Good evening, everyone. And I also wanted to thank Joanna for using those specific scenarios of children. It was a very powerful illustration of those experiences. On my part, I just wanted to begin with a question that when a student puts their head down on a desk or refuses to participate or lashes out at a peer or misses school repeatedly or seems unable to focus, what story do we tell ourselves about that behavior? For many years, education often viewed behavior through a lens of compliance and discipline. We asked, why is a student acting this way? What's wrong with them? But over the last 2 decades, neuroscience, public health, and resilience research has taught us something important. Behavior is often communication, communication that is telling us how someone is surviving or thriving. And to understand that communication, we need to understand adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. ACEs are traumatic experiences that occur during childhood. The original ACE study identified experiences such as abuse, neglect, domestic violence, substance abuse in the home, mental illness in the home, parental separation, and incarceration of a family member. And since that groundbreaking research, we've come to understand that adversity extends beyond the original 10 ACEs, and children can also be impacted by community violence, racism, poverty, house instability, discrimination, food insecurity, and chronic fear. And for many immigrant families today, fear associated with immigration enforcement, family separation, uncertainty about legal status, and anti-immigrant rhetoric can function as a significant source of chronic stress. And the important point is not that adversity automatically damages children. The important point is that chronic stress changes how the brain and body respond to the world. When children are living with uncertainty and fear, their systems often prioritize survival over learning. The brain asks, "Am I safe?" before it asks, "What am I learning?" And if we don't understand this reality, we risk misinterpreting survival responses as character flaws. So understanding ACEs requires us to make a profound shift. Instead of asking what's wrong with this child, we begin asking what happened to this child. And eventually we move even further and ask what's right with this child? What strengths have helped them survive? What support do they need to thrive? A student who appears defiant may be protecting themselves. A student who shuts down may just be overwhelmed. A student who constantly seeks attention may be seeking connection. A student who cannot focus may be carrying worries far bigger than the assignment in front of them. When we understand trauma and adversity, behavior becomes information rather than evidence of a student's worth or potential. So this doesn't mean lowering our expectations. It means understanding context. It means responding with curiosity before judgment. It means recognizing that accountability and compassion can exist together. Accountability and compassion can exist together. Most importantly, it means understanding that every behavior reflects an unmet need, a stress response, a developmental challenge, or a strength that has become overused in a difficult environment. The questions become, how do we create schools that meet those needs while helping students develop resilience? And before we can think about what we need to do, we need to reflect on who we, the adults, need to become. I often refer to Dr. Sean Ginwright's Healing-Centered Engagement Framework and the ACE Interface Core Protective Systems of Resilience to guide how I've built healing-centered schools and classrooms. Dr. Ginwright argues that trauma-informed approaches, while valuable, often focus primarily on the wounds, while healing-centered engagement asks us to see something larger. It asks us to see people not only through the lens of what has happened to them, but also through the lens of their strengths, identities, culture, hopes, and aspirations. Healing-centered engagement is rooted in 5 key elements: culture, agency, relationships, meaning, and aspiration. And these align remarkably well with the resilience research identified as the core protective systems that help children thrive: self-efficacy, self-regulation, a positive view of self and future, relationships with caring and competent adults, and they also bring back around culture, community, and faith in that overlap. So together, these provide a roadmap for schools experience immigration-related fear. So once again, I ask us, who do we need to become? First, it looks like creating safety without pretending fear does not exist. Students know when adults are avoiding difficult conversations. Healing-centered schools acknowledge reality while communicating stability. Students hear, "You belong here. You matter. We care about you. We will support you." Safety is not simply physical, it is emotional, relational, cultural, and psychological. Every interaction should communicate dignity and belonging. It looks like honoring culture. Fear isolates people. Culture reconnects them. Continue to reflect on who do we need to become. For immigrant students and families, culture is not just tradition. Culture is resilience. It is language, history, family stories, spirituality, values, and identity. Healing-centered schools intentionally celebrate home languages, include diverse histories in curriculum, elevate community voices, and create opportunities for students to see themselves reflected in the life of the school. When students see their identities valued, they develop a stronger sense of self, and a strong sense of self becomes a protective factor against fear. It looks like building agency. Fear creates helplessness. Agency restores power. Students experiencing immigration-related stress often feel that major decisions affecting their lives are being made by people far away, and schools cannot change national policy. But schools can create experiences where students discover their own voice and influence, right? Once again, who do we need to become to create the opportunities where students are leading projects, solving problems, sharing stories, creating art, participating in decision-making at the school level, and advocating for their communities? Every experience of meaningful contribution strengthens self-efficacy, the belief that I can make a difference. And self-efficacy is one of the strongest protective systems we can build. It looks like investing in relationships. The most powerful protective factor in a child's life remains a caring, competent adult. Not a program, not a strategy, a relationship. Healing Center schools intentionally create structures that ensure every student is known by name, their story, their strengths, and dreams. When immigration-related fear is present, relationships become even more important. Students need adults who communicate. I see you. I care about you. I'm glad you're here. Families need trusted relationships with schools as well. We heard so much about trust. Healing-centered schools prioritize language access, family partnerships, listening sessions, community resource connections, and authentic collaboration. Trust becomes part of the intervention. Who do we need to become? It looks like supporting self-regulation. Children cannot learn effectively when their nervous systems are overwhelmed. Healing-centered schools recognize that regulation comes before rigor. This may include mindfulness practices, movement breaks, restorative circles, calming spaces, breathing techniques, art experiences, and opportunities for emotional expression. And these practices are not extras. They're supports that help students access learning. They're integrated into the day, into the regular school day. We're not just simply teaching math, reading, and science. We're helping young people learn how to navigate stress, regulate emotions, and remain connected to themselves and others. They're being supported by regulated adults. It looks like helping students make meaning. One of the greatest harms of chronic fear is that it can make life feel chaotic and random. Human beings need meaning. Students need opportunities to reflect on their experiences, tell their stories, connect with their histories, and understand themselves as part of larger traditions of resilience. Healing-centered schools help students see themselves not as victims of circumstances, but as authors of their own stories. Meaning making transforms suffering into purpose. And finally, it looks like nurturing aspiration. Fear narrows our vision. Healing expands it. So students need adults who consistently ask, what are your dreams? What gifts do you carry? What future do you want to create? Hope is not denial. Hope is the belief that possibility still exists. Hope is a political act. Aspiration helps students develop a positive view of themselves and their future. Another critical protective factor identified by resilience research. When students can imagine a future, they are more likely to persevere through present challenges because they can move beyond what the problems are that they are facing and into a space of possibility. With everything going on in our state right now, it could be hard for immigrant children to imagine the possibility, which is why it is critical for schools to create spaces for them to dream. Understanding ACEs changes the questions we ask. Instead of asking what's wrong with this student, we ask what experiences might be shaping this behavior. Healing-centered engagement takes us one step further. It asks not only what happens to students, but also what is strong within them. And ultimately, healing-centered schools do more than help students survive adversity. They help young people discover their strength, their voice, their belonging, and their possibility. And that may be one of the most important responsibilities education has in this moment. Next slide. If you would like to learn more about how NJEA is building healing-centered schools that build healing learning environments, support teacher leadership, and connect to communities, you can scan this QR code to learn more about the access model and how we support schools, what professional development we offer, and what support has grown and flourished out of our partnership with public schools throughout the state. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Adams, and thank you for reminding us such an important question in education, who do we need to become? So I love that. I'd like to move into the next section of our panel discussion, and that is what humanizing classroom practice looks like. Our next set of panelists will be talking more about classroom experience. Our panelist number 4 is Dr. Zhongfang Chen. He's an associate professor of bilingual education at Rutgers University, Newark. He holds a PhD in curriculum instruction from Boston College. Yay, BC! His research examines different ways that teachers can make their classrooms more heterogeneous, humanizing, and inclusive for all students in ESL and dual language bilingual educational contexts, and how to prepare culturally and linguistically competent teachers with social justice praxis. Dr. Chen has published extensively in the field of ESL and bilingual education and teacher education. He is a co-editor of several books, including Translanguaging in Action in English Medium Classrooms, a resource book for teachers, and Asian American in Bilingualism and Bilingual Education, The Long Overdue Voice. And so my question for you, Dr. Chen, is how can educators design humanizing, trauma-informed classrooms that both recognize immigration-related trauma as a lived experience and affirm multilingual students' identities?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you again for inviting me to be part of this important conversation. So as I listened to the previous speakers, I was very struck by the many layers of challenges that multilingual learners and their families may be navigating today. We have heard about legal protections, immigration-related stress, family separation, trauma, and resilience. These realities are deeply important because they remind us that what happens outside of the school inevitably enters our classrooms. So students, they do not leave their experiences at the classroom door. So with regard to the question, I think as a scholar of bilingual education and translanguaging, I would like to begin with what may seem like a simple statement. Students are more than their trauma. While we must acknowledge immigration-related trauma as lived reality for many students, we must also be careful not to define students by that trauma. Multilingual learners are not simply recipients of hardship. They are language users, culture navigators, community members, knowledge holders, creators, dreamers, and resilient individuals. If we focus only on what students have experienced, we may risk overlooking who they are. So this is one reason I really appreciate the spirit of the STAHR framework. What resonates with me is its emphasis on humanizing resilience. It invites us not only to recognize challenges, but also to honor dignity, agency, identity, and strength. In many ways, this is also the goal of humanizing approaches in bilingual education. So one concept from my field that I believe can help us think about this work is translanguaging. You can also find this in our common vocabulary, I think posted on Padlet. So translanguaging is a term that sounds academic, but the idea is actually quite simple. It refers to the ways multilingual people naturally draw upon all their linguistic resources to communicate, to learn, to think, and to make meaning. So rather than viewing languages as separate boxes that must remain strictly apart, translanguaging recognizes that multilingual individuals use their full linguistic repertoires as integrated resources. So in educational settings, however, students, they are often asked to suppress parts of their repertoires. They may receive explicit or implicit messages that only English belongs in the classroom. Without realizing it, schools can sometimes communicate that students must leave part of themselves at the classroom door in order to succeed. Translanguaging starts from a different assumption. It tells students that their languages are assets rather than obstacles, and that their multilingualism is something to build upon rather than overcome. So for me, this is why translanguaging is not simply a language teaching strategy. It is a humanizing stance. It acknowledges students as whole people rather than just English learners. It allows them to bring their experiences, identities, cultures, and languages into the learning process, and that can be especially important during times of uncertainty or stress. So when we talk about trauma-informed education, we often emphasize emotional safety and psychological safety, and rightly so. But I would suggest that multilingual learners also need what I would call linguistic safety. Linguistic safety means that students, they do not have to hide their languages, accents, identities, or ways of communicating in order to belong. Imagine experiencing fear, uncertainty, or stress, and simultaneously being told that you can only use part of your voice. This is often what monolingual schooling asks multilingual students to do. So by contrast, linguistically safe classrooms communicate a different message. They tell students your languages belong here, your culture belongs here, your family belongs here, you belong here. These messages may seem small, but they are powerful because they directly counter experiences of marginalization and exclusion that some multilingual learners encounter both inside and outside of school. So in practice, this work often happens through seemingly ordinary decisions. It might mean incorporating multilingual books and texts into the curriculum. So think about these ways that you can do in your classroom. It might mean allowing students to discuss ideas in the language that helps them think most deeply before sharing in English. It might mean inviting students to create identity projects that reflect their linguistic and cultural journeys. It might engaging families as partners and recognizing the rich knowledge that exists within homes and communities. And sometimes it is as simple as learning to pronounce students' names correctly and taking the time to learn their stories. So, taken together, these practices help create what I would describe as communities of care. Communities of care matter because resilience does not develop in isolation. Resilience grows through relationships. It grows when students know that someone sees them, values them, and believes in them. So too often conversations about multilingual learners focus exclusively on risk factors. Yet I would argue that multilingual learners already demonstrate remarkable resilience every day. Think about what it takes to navigate multiple languages, multiple cultures, and multiple worlds. That requires adaptability, creativity, persistence, and problem solving. These are not signs of weakness, these are signs of strength. So our responsibility as educators is not to give students resilience. Many already possess it. Our responsibility is to create environments where that resilience can flourish, where students can leverage their languages, affirm their identities, and experience a genuine sense of belonging. So when I think about the question posted today, how can educators design humanizing, trauma-informed classrooms that both recognize immigration-related trauma while affirming multilingual students' identities? My answer is this. We begin by seeing students as more than their trauma. We create linguistic, emotional, and relational safety. We honor students' full linguistic repertoires through translanguaging, and we build communities of care where students' identities, dignity, and strengths are recognized every day. In doing so, we create classrooms where multilingual learners, they are not simply surviving, they are thriving. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chen. Just describing the strengths-based approach. I appreciated that and the importance of, affirming each child's identity in the classroom. Um, I will introduce our next panelist now. I will introduce Michelle Land. Miss Land serves as Social Responsibility Co-Chair for TESOL International and is a past president of NJTESOL-NJBE. She's a seasoned multilingual ESL teacher and professional development presenter. She brings in direct high school classroom experience working with S-Life students and those with limited or interrupted formal education, as well as learners navigating active or historical trauma. A question for you, Ms. Land, is what does trauma-sensitive pedagogy look like in practice for S-Life students whose educational histories have already been shaped by displacement, interrupted schooling, and loss?
Thank you very much. That's a very important question, in my opinion. First, I want to thank you all for doing this. This is a fantastic panel that you're putting together at a very important time. As I started to think about the experiences I've had over my career, I realized it's about 30 years since I actually had my first experience with a student who had experienced trauma, and I was completely unprepared. I was a new teacher, and I felt like I knew what I was doing, but I was not prepared for this student, and it happened to be in another country that I was living and working in. So I want to make sure we understand that the trauma affects everybody. And it affects everybody in different ways, and it is not specific to just one country or one one group. In fact, it's an unavoidable fact of life, in my opinion, that it does affect people during different parts of their lives. So as a classroom teacher, when our students walk in, we don't necessarily know that they've already experienced trauma. And they have a lot of different experiences behind them. And a lot of their experiences can actually be very positive for their academic successes. But unfortunately, it can also have a negative effect on their ability to learn. In fact, I may have a student who's experienced some severe trauma. I wouldn't even know it because they don't walk in with a big sign on their head saying trauma victim. In fact, as a matter of fact, they're almost very good at hiding the fact that they've experienced trauma because what they've experienced makes them feel like they are not perhaps good enough or not accepted by society, depending on what it is. So I try to make sure that, first of all, that I have a very safe environment. Anybody who's been in my classroom can see that I have a big welcome sign in many different languages. I have lots of comfy chairs in my room. My room becomes the place where the kids want to hang out just because it's physically comfortable, and hopefully my demeanor helps them to also feel spiritually and emotionally comfortable. And then we need time. We need time and space for them to start to feel safe enough to open up. And so unfortunately, I'm echoing a lot of what many of you have already talked about, but I'm hoping that I can put a little specific character on it when I speak about the experiences that have happened with my students. For some of them, once I've determined that they have experienced trauma, if they've opened up to me, I find that the trauma can linger in their lives for a very long time. And that can depend on many different things. It can depend on the type of support system that they have. It can depend on their personality and the type of trauma that they've experienced. But for others, they're able to process it a little bit quicker. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about is some of the issues that are kind of clues to me that somebody may be experiencing trauma or having had the experience of trauma. And so some of them we've already talked about. Increased absences, students who do not want to come to school. Now, there are some students who literally do not like to come to school because school is not home laying in their bed watching TikToks. But there are other people who coming to school, it is very stressful for them. But of course, it's the law until they're 16. And so that's a piece of the puzzle that we need to first help them manage, helping it make it possible for them to come into school. My district has been very good about supporting these students who are feeling that they do not feel comfortable getting on the bus, or they do not feel comfortable coming in with everybody, with the big crowds. And they will even help to support them coming in a little bit later in a variety of ways, just to get them into school, to get them started in the process, making sure that they get into that routine. It's also very important that we follow up with the family. So the family is a big key component. And it could be a brother, a sister, it could be parents, it could be an aunt or an uncle, the person that is their main caregiver who is aware of their situations. Other times we've had experiences with students who have really withdrawn from socializing with their peers or forming relationships. They really struggle. And so we try to encourage small group settings or even one-on-one interactions and identifying that student in class that they might feel comfortable with in order to help them start to trust their peers so that they can start to relax and allow their learning to begin. Because as we all are aware, when they're in that heightened state of stress and anxiety, learning becomes extremely difficult. Another thing, I've had experience with a student who had a lot of difficulty dealing with reality and would speak a lot about issues that perhaps were negatively affecting her, but were not necessarily her reality. They might have been somebody else's reality, but she, because of the trauma and the fact that she hadn't worked through it, was taking it as her own because she only knew how to deal with the pain and the trauma. And so I find that it's very important to validate those feelings because those feelings are very real. But to also try to provide a reality check, try to get to the heart of the issue and try to help them work through the fact that maybe it isn't exactly happening right to them. But always making sure that their feelings are validated because that's extremely important. They often will have difficulty concentrating in school because concentrating when you are still working through things that have happened in your life is almost impossible. So I find that it's really important to give them that time and grace to work through things. And if that means extending deadlines, or if that means accepting that maybe they're just not going to be able to do something during that time period, that's, I find, very valuable. And by developing that and giving them that grace, they start to learn how to give themselves grace. Because ultimately, it's hard for them sometimes to acknowledge the fact that they are having these issues. And it makes it extremely difficult for them to then start the process of dealing with it. And then finally, unfortunately, a lot of our students do not have the mental health support that they need in order to process trauma. I am not certified in any kind of mental health care at all. And so I do not feel that I am qualified to help them process the trauma. I just tried to give them the space to feel safe. But I find that it's extremely important to make sure that we reach out to our community. I find that our nurses are very valuable resources. We've had a lot of work with Perform Care, and I'm sure there are other organizations in the state that would help support students who have experienced these things. So I hope that this helps put a little experience behind the things that we're talking about. And I'm very thankful that you all were here to hear about this. And if you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, for giving us concrete examples as well of what this looks like for SLICE students and for what it looks like in the classroom. So I appreciate that. Before I introduce the next panelist, I just want everybody to know we're falling behind a little bit in the schedule. So we apologize for that delay, which may mean we'll run a little bit over. But our next panelist is Ms. Ingram. She's an instructional coach from Orange Public Schools, where she continues her passion for education and advocacy. She graduated from Seton Hall University with a Bachelor of Science in Elementary Education and a Master's of Arts in Instructional Design and Technology. She has served as a member of the board of directors for the NEA, or the National Education Association. She's also served on the New Jersey Education Association, NJEA, and the New Jersey Teachers of English to Speakers of Other Languages and New Jersey Bilingual Education, otherwise known as NJTESOL-NJBE. And she is also a member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, Inc. My question for you, Amber, is what role can instructional coaches play in helping new bilingual and ESL educators build professional communities that support both educators' well-being and student resilience as well?
Thank you so much. I love this question because I love working with new teachers. I think that generally new teachers have this rhetoric around them that they're novices, that they don't have the ability to do what they need to do. They need to wait their turn. You don't know what you're talking about. But in the research that we've seen, there's a lot of untapped potential in early career teachers and new teachers, and the change that needs to happen, as we've heard tonight, there's so much that's happening in education. There's so much with it happening in our kids. The change needs to happen now. So we need everybody on board in order to make that change happen. It's communal. Everyone has a purpose and a way to maximize their impact through serving in ways that are the most authentic to them. You have the people that are going to stand in the front lines, and you have the people that are going to be behind the scenes and making all the structures work in order to get to our goal. So in order to maximize that change, we have to use professional communities, and that's why they're so important. They offer places of solace. to hone our own skill set by leaning on others, to prioritize rest. Rest is radical and transformative. And using someone else's brain or having a thought partner to work that through is where we can do that. In my school district, I invite teachers to share articles, strategies, lessons that worked, lessons that didn't work, frustrations in general, praises, anything when we have our common planning time, just so then we can kind of work it out together. So it is structured in a way where no one feels like there's a hierarchical system. It's structured in a way where we can have conversations that are more authentic so we can get to the root of creating the best learning experience for our students, because that's what's really the most important. I think also because we have those more formal conversations during the common planning time, I've heard from new teachers that gives them the opportunity to have conversations in the hallway. So even if it's an ELA teacher, we can still they can still have conversations with the science teacher or a math teacher or the ESL teacher. Everyone is kind of connected because they're all our kids. We're all teaching the same kids. So I really feel, especially for early career teachers, feeling supported by admin is great. Feeling supported by me as the coach is great, but feeling supported by your fellow teachers is really what's going to keep you in a school building and minimize that burnout. And I'll end with this because I know that we were a little short on time, but as you enter the field, new teacher, I know it may seem like the most difficult, the hardest point in our history, but you are smart, you are resilient, and you have the power to make the change. And I can't just wait to see what you guys do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amber, for sharing just more about collaboration and how helpful that is in the school systems. Our next panelist is Dr. Rebecca Bryan. She's the Executive Director of the New Jersey Department of Children and Families Office of Resilience. She oversees initiatives that transform New Jersey into a trauma-responsive, healing-centered state, grounded in positive and adverse childhood experiences, science, as well as principles of healing-centered engagement. Dr. Bryan has decades of experience in nursing, including as a primary care nurse practitioner and in community outreach. She has been an adjunct professor at the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing and Rutgers University Camden, and has published research demonstrating how risks generated by ACEs align with risks for wounding and delayed healing. Dr. Bryan earned her DNP from Rutgers University Camden, her MSN from the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing, and her BSN from Gwynedd Mercy College. She holds the Trauma Competency Certification from Lakeside Global Institute. My question for you, as educators who hold the weight of students' immigration-related trauma, how do we sustain our own capacity to show up with care without burning out? And how does shifting our lens from adverse experiences to positive childhood experiences transform both our approach to student resilience and our own long-term professional sustainability?
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. And I hear three questions being asked here. So the first question I'm hearing is, how do we prevent ourselves from burning out? So hopefully you're on my sustaining our capacity slide. We are at risk of expending precious energy on resistance with thoughts like, it shouldn't be this way, right? None of us think it should be this way. But expending energy on something that we can't control just drains us in a way that's not helpful. We need to reserve our energy to sustain us through challenging times. And so this brings me to my first bullet, which is the practice of radical acceptance of what is rather than how we want it to be. Reality shows us that suffering and joy are two sides of the coin we call life. Suffering comes unbidden, and joy is something we can cultivate. For some, this may be guilt-inducing, like having us ask, why could you be joyful, or how could you be joyful in a moment like this and in a world like this? However, joy, I would argue, is not a privilege. It is a necessity for well-being. Krista Tippett, who's a well-known author and creator of the On Being podcast, says, joy in human life is a resilience-making, life-giving birthright of being human. Being intentional about creating small moments of joy every day, if possible, or if that doesn't feel possible, noticing and allowing yourself to feel others' joy will help sustain capacity during these challenging times. The next bullet I have here is we can create boundaries, right? And maybe we're not creating them so much as we're just recognizing that boundaries exist. So asking ourselves what is within my control and what is outside of my control. And that which is outside of control, somehow we have to learn to let it go. Because again, it's just draining us, and focusing on what we can control. The third recommendation for promoting your resilience is to nurture your own relational health. We human beings are wired for physical connection. And I do think that that's one of the beautiful things about a school setting. You are in the physical presence of so many other humans all the time. I am grateful to what Amber Ingram was just sharing this evening about instructional coaching, because she was pointing towards this. Relational health is really important at work as well as in our personal life. After all, we spend the majority of our hours during the week with our colleagues. So do you have at least one colleague with whom you can share your challenges, both inside and outside of work, your feelings, and that you enjoy spending time together? Do you feel like you are a part of your school community? With self-compassion, assessing your relational health, both personally and professionally, is a worthy endeavor. Asking yourself if the people in your orbit give you energy versus are they energy vampires? Do they just drain you of energy? And being intentional about valuing and investing in your relational health. And then finally, a recommendation for promoting your own resilience is recognizing that positive emotions actually have an undoing effect on our burnout, on our level of burnout. I just clicked into the chat 3 different links. The first of them is from Duke University, and there are a series of well-being tools that have been created that actually can help you to generate positive emotions. And what's interesting to me, probably because my kid created this graphic, is that hope is like a superpower when it comes to promoting positive feelings and minimizing burnout. So with that, I'll go to the next slide. The next question I was asked was, how do positive childhood experiences transform approaches to student resilience? So I want to quote Amanda Wynn from Healthy Outcomes from Positive Experiences, which is called the HOPE model. And we think, she said, we think of PCEs as a kind of now what to ACEs. Relational health is the foundation of resilience, and PCEs are a proxy for measuring this in childhood. In fact, the most recent study, there's so much research coming out about positive childhood experiences right now. The most recent research published 2 weeks ago demonstrates that PCEs improve both mental and physical health and well-being regardless of ACEs. In fact, they have a more positive impact on people who have experienced adversity. So just like ACEs, we know, contribute very substantially to chronic mental and physical disease, as well as impacts on well-being and social consequences across the lifespan. It turns out that PCEs do as well. PCEs, you see on the slide I have here, they coexist with ACEs. So it's not like you have to decide if an experience is either a PCE or an ACE. Instead, they coexist. They are protective and they mitigate the impact of ACEs, and they do point the way to what we can do. The 7 PCEs that you see listed here, Kate actually described earlier. The point I want to make about them is that they do differ from protective factors. PCEs are embodied experiences, and only an individual can say whether they've experienced them. Protective factors like providing social emotional learning opportunities, encouraging social connections, and providing concrete support are externally observable, also very important. And I'd like to suggest that protective factors set the stage to increase the likelihood of PCEs occurring. I'm grateful to Amanda Adams and her presentation on health-centered classrooms because her recommendations really set the stage for increasing the likelihood that children will have PCEs. So I was hearing things, and I encourage things like practicing prevention, managing classrooms with many routines and a few important rules, and have the class practice those routines until they're second nature. This creates an atmosphere of predictability, which can increase a sense of safety. We can look for moments of micro connection throughout the day in the way we greet students, in the way we remember to ask a student about their soccer game, right? Or looking for a chance to connect during transition periods. We can start mornings and afternoons with check-ins, affirming what children are feeling and experiencing, being transparent about it, realizing that any emotion is okay. And the important part is to actually name it. We can look for initiatives that strengthen a sense of belonging, like a buddy bench on the playground, and having school community traditions that students help to create. And then finally, the third question I was asked was, how do PCEs help our own as educators long-term professional sustainability? And what I'd like to say is that promoting PCEs benefits us by giving us a sense of meaning and purpose, which can strengthen our sense of compassion satisfaction. We hear about compassion fatigue a lot, which is when the work we do and the giving we do just wears us out, right? We get tired of other people's problems. But there's a flip side of that, which is compassion satisfaction. And that's really being rooted, grounded in your why. And I think that when we're creating spaces for PCEs and the kids respond to that, that can help us see our why as well. You are enough. When you present to your students, when you are present to your students, when you're celebrating who they are as individuals, you are one of the PCEs. You are one of the non-parent adults who take a genuine interest. And then I'd ask you just to quickly flip to the last slide. At the Office of Resilience, we have created a virtual technical assistance center called Healing and Resilient NJ. You can use this QR code to link to it. I also put it in the chat. We have all sorts of resources to educate about adverse childhood experiences in New Jersey, all about PCEs. We have a resilience room that's kind of like a little mind spa. So when you're really stressed out during the day, you could turn to that. And we also are building a trauma-informed resource directory. So any organization that is embracing trauma-informed approaches can add themselves to this resource directory. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bryan, and really giving us concrete examples of what PCEs look like in the classrooms. Very helpful. The next panelist I want to introduce, and honored to introduce, is Cecilia Vila. She's a supervisor of ESL and bilingual and social studies at the Township of Ocean School District in New Jersey. Her experience, both personal and professional, with second language acquisition drives her commitment to advocacy and the implementation of best practice. As a multilingual student herself, she has firsthand experience of being an immigrant student in the U.S., and as a former bilingual and ESL teacher, she has implemented best practices in and outside of the classroom to promote equitable access to education. Currently, she works to develop a program that leverages the linguistic and cultural assets of all learners by building the capacity of other educators. As president of NJTESOL and NJBE, she continues to advocate for multilingual students, their families, and other educators. My question for you, Cecilia, is what does it take at the district level to build administrative teams that genuinely understand the intersection of trauma-informed practice and MTSS for multilingual learners?
Hello, everyone. Again, Dr. Bryan. I want to point out that I feel very validated. I often say to my teachers, assume positive intent, because truthfully, if you don't, this can be a very tasking job and a very tasking field. So thank you for that. And so I also want to say thank you for the opportunity to share this space with everybody. As I've heard all my previous panelists, I feel a little bit more recharged as an educator, as a leader, to continue being productive in my panic rather than paralyzed by my fear. So to your question, so much of the work that we do around MTSS is responsive in nature, right? We are problem solvers in real time, boots on the ground, first responders, right? So right at the time also that trauma is developing. Like we're currently living in one of those times again in history where this is trauma that not only we're responding to in real time, is generational trauma that is forming now for the future. And so there are really limitations and a lower level of quality that we can provide in this response when we're just being responsive in nature, right? When there's a problem we need to solve rather than being proactive. And so to that end, I just wanted to go quickly through some shifts that I had to do to my mindset and my collaborative team in leadership, both at NJTESOL-NJBE and in my professional in my school district. So transitioning from the classroom, as you mentioned, I was a bilingual and ESL teacher where my impact was visible, right? It was measurable, it was very direct, it was immediate. And I transitioned into a supervisor role outside of the classroom. I had to really shift my thinking because my impact wasn't so immediate. It wasn't so tangible. It felt very much like I was not impacting change, right? So then I had to really think about how I interacted with my own teams, with my own colleagues, and really what my role was as the ML lady or the ESL specialist, as I'm often labeled in those spaces. I also happen to be the only Hispanic immigrant in my admin team. So oftentimes, right, I became sort of that token person where we would turn to, and that's a big responsibility. And so a shift that I'm thinking and that I'm first mentioning really is a mind shift in how we think about equity. With the renaissance of ENI, CRT, and other initiatives that were federally and state funded, at times mandated, right? There was an overuse, in my opinion, of mislabeling of what equity truly meant for our learning communities. It became about writing curriculum, forming committees, doing book clubs on white fragility. It became a thing or things that district is. And then as a result, as we're seeing now, and we have been seeing for a couple of years now, there were things that could be taken away. And so if we really want to ensure that equity transcends times and changes in leadership at any level, then we need to really shift our thinking from what we do to how we do. As it pertains to MTSS or really any other district level process, what I'm asking really is, how are we being equitable to MLs as the leading question in all spaces, in all rooms, right? That should really be the foundation when we're talking about MTSS planning. So for instance, over the past 4 years at Ocean Township, Tier 1 through Tier 3 interventions have gone through an overhaul and redesign, ensuring all students have access to the appropriate supports. Oftentimes, multi-tier systems of support are conflated or mislabeled with intervention. Oftentimes are weaponized as a pipeline for child study teams to have to make misinformed decisions about labeling the supports a child may need or serving as a barrier to what a child actually needs, right? And so what we really need to think about is how every step of the process, right? Every step of this pipeline, we continually ask this question, how are we being equitable to the students? At our district, it's certainly a process that is not done yet, but it certainly is a process that has evolved to be inclusive in linguistically and cultural domains, from the data collection, how to interpret universal screeners, how to develop screeners that are relevant, how do we do progress monitoring, what interventions look like, and how do we assess progress. Similarly, the second shift really calls upon dismantling and then rebuilding how we're approaching educated multilingual learners and consequently support them through MTSS. So from a mentality of a silo, right, where the ESL teacher is the holder of all knowledge and the decision maker and the one entity, right, of all ML things. If we do that, then our MLs are really reduced to their English language proficiency. And then we don't necessarily see the intersection within all these levels and facets of the identity. This shift really calls for then intersectionality. So for instance, in our district, as I mentioned, I am literally called the ML lady in our administrative team. I'm often called upon to make decisions beyond the ESL department that involve MLs, right? It comes from a place of deferring to the expert, but in reality, inadvertently, it defers ownership of the student. And MLs really are everyone's students, as I think Amber mentioned. In practicality, really, what it means is that while I can offer context, suggestions, my professional opinion, my colleagues have to own their decision making, and they are committed to continuously learning about supporting MLs in their respective spaces. So, for example, as we're currently scheduled to discuss all MLs who went through the first level of screening to potentially qualify for multi-levels of intervention programming next year. We invited all our ESL teachers to the table. We are going to analyze language development data to try to contextualize this process to ensure that we are, in fact, providing the interventions that it needed. When you think about this intersectionality as a means of collaboration, it really calls for everybody to become better at listening. Rather than listening to response as to why we do the things that we do a certain way, it really is necessary for leaders and teachers alike to exercise the ability to seek understanding first. I think so often because we've been placed on this silo, made the specialist, there is a fear of saying, I don't know. And I think one of my previous panelists, I think it was Michelle, said, don't be afraid to go ask for help of someone else. And so very often we hear some learned truths about multilingual learners, right, that inform why a district process is set up a normal way, right? Like one of those urban legends is until a student has been in the US for 2 years, you can't provide a referral to child study teams, or if the child is slight or a newcomer, then we can't provide them with intervention, right? Those are learned truths about multilingual learners that when you really ask that question to understand, well, why is it that we do it that way, oftentimes there isn't a response, right? And so you have to shift and be able to also provide some receipts, right? I had to learn that as I am collaborating in this intersection of leaders and decision makers, I have to provide receipts to everything I say, right? If I'm saying it can't just be up to me, right? Oftentimes my colleagues will be frustrated because I will say it really isn't up to me, or I am not going to make that decision for you. Or my favorite one, when they want me to say, is it a language thing or a special education thing? I say it doesn't really matter. And I am not one who's going to answer, but I can help you, give you the context, right? At a time really when funding is limited, I have to really shift my thinking between these challenges and think a little bit of where there are opportunities, right? And so becoming well-versed on Title III funding, Title III immigrant funding, and what it can and cannot be used has also helped with some sort of innovation, right? It has helped also justify tailoring MTSS processes, tailoring guidance, tailoring counseling, tailoring trauma-informed practices, professional development to really meet these needs as trauma is continuously evolving. And then the works that we truly do towards develop MTSS that are culturally and linguistically relevant for our students, support systems that are responsive to immigration and racial trauma is not really about adding more to already full plates, but rather replacing some of these elements, some of these processes that are high effort, low return, those learned truths, old practices that they take a lot of the time and energy in our staff, but are not giving us results, right? And let's replace them with some others that yield more in return. On the screen, you see a QR code. It will give you access to a presentation I had the opportunity to provide for NJTESOL-NJBE 2 years ago, and it's sort of a roadmap to some of the steps I've taken to go through and models how these shifts really look in action for someone who is entering a supervisory role, or you're sort of like a middle management person in which you're not in central office, but you're also not in the classroom. Essentially, while the work is certainly not done, I think it is clear that there is evidence that it can be done. And so, once again, I thank you all for allowing me to share this space. I'll be happy to provide any resources, further support via email. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vila, for sharing your perspective as a district leader and adding to the conversation. Our next panelist is Dr. Sagasti Supis, who is the Director of Global Engagement and Senior International Officer of the Office of Global Engagement at Stockton University. The mission of the Office of Global Engagement is to integrate transformative global learning across teaching, research, and service, preparing students to engage responsibly in a multicultural, interdependent world. Her office provides opportunities for education abroad and away within the U.S., supports the success of international students at Stockton, cultivates international partnerships, helps faculty who teach and research abroad, and offers on-campus internationally focused programming. My question for you, international students and scholars frequently experience sudden precarity when federal immigration policies shift or global conflicts arise. How has your office developed infrastructure to support international students and scholars navigating academic mobility status, cultural transition, and questions of belonging, while also honoring the comprehensive human experience and relational connections? What challenges or barriers have emerged in that work? More broadly, what responsibilities does a truly globally engaged institution have to its communities during a time when public policies may appear to contradict the values of global engagement?
Thank you so much, Kate. And thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important conversation. It's interesting to learn about the ways that immigrant children are supported in school, since I don't work in the K-12 space. But I was an immigrant student who didn't speak English when I started school, and learning about the supportive frameworks I'm hearing about from my fellow panelists is incredibly uplifting. As Kate said, I lead the Stockton's Office of Global Engagement, and one of the areas I oversee is international student services. College students have unique challenges and traumas for a number of reasons, and I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the legal situation right now. I'm not a lawyer, but this is sort of what people in my field are really focusing on at the moment, because we're very protective of our students. So typically and traditionally, obtaining an F1 or a J1 visa to come to the United States and study is a really difficult thing. And students are given a document called an I-20, which demonstrates their status in the US, and then they're also given a visa. The visa is not often, is frequently not for the same length of time as the I-20, because the visa is sort of like a ticket into the country, and the I-20 sort of shows what their legal status is while they're here. When students come for 4 years, but for instance, a visa is only issued for 1 year, what that means is they can stay for their 4 years and be within legal status, but they can't leave and come back in. Which means if you're talking about kids that are leaving their families for the first time at the age of 17 or 18, they're saying goodbye to them for a minimum of 4 years, and their families know that. That's not new to this current situation. That's just how the system has been. But in 2025, we had termination of status that happened to many students across the US. The result for students was that they were kind of in limbo. They couldn't continue with classes. If they had jobs, they couldn't continue legally with their jobs. They were supposed to go home. Most of them, a lot of them, sued. There were class action suits. There were suits by advocates and by universities. And in the end, that was reversed. That policy was reversed, but the damage was done, and the students that were left after that were left with a sense of instability and a fear that this could happen to them again. And currently, another issue that is happening is, on top of the fact that it's very difficult to get a visa to the United States, and sometimes students spend a lot of money and go 2 or 3 years waiting for visas. We now have a complete travel ban on 39 countries and a freeze on visa processing for another 75 countries. Disproportionately, those are African countries. So visa non-processing, instability, low staffing in the State Department, all the lawsuits, etc., have caused a lot of trauma for students. Now there's a new thing that has come up, the debate about duration of status, and there is a lack of clarity, which also has effects on students. So duration of status is the length of time students are legally in status once they enter the United States, which, as I said, is different from the visa. Currently, they can stay as long as they are making normal progress toward an approved academic program, or they are engaged in optional practical training, which is work after they graduate for 1 year or 3 years, depending on their program. The proposed rule to eliminate duration of status and replace it with an exact date that coincides with the length of their program is not, and it cannot exceed 4 years, is probably going to pass very soon. We don't know all of the details, and the students don't know how this will affect them, neither do we. If they need more time than the 4 years that they're given, they have to go through a formal extension and pay an additional fee. We don't necessarily have wealthy students. There's a misconception that international students are here and they're very, very wealthy and can pay all their fees. That's not the case. They are normal students just like everyone else who struggle just like everyone else. Students can also extend to do another degree, but they will have to pay another fee. And the degree must be progressive, not lateral. In other words, a student who just completed a master's degree cannot apply to do another master's degree. They must do a PhD or an EDD. So this is going to be challenging for duration of status. They will also, PhD programs, those of you who have PhDs know that nobody finishes it in 4 years. They will pretty much all need extensions. The longer undergraduate programs, for instance, at Stockton, we have several programs where students do 4+1. They do an undergrad with a master's degree, but they would have to incorporate that. That's obviously longer than 4 years and have to apply for an extension to complete it. This is going to affect students who have program changes, degree changes. A lot of times students don't finish in 4 years. They might have one more class to complete. They might have other reasons to change. When they transition from an English language program to a degree seeking program, that's going to affect them because that's going to be more than 4 years. Or if they transfer to a new school, all of those things will affect that 4-year rule. Students won't be able to transfer easily and not at all until they complete at least 1 year in their current institution. So if it's not a good fit or if it's not going well, they cannot transfer. And if a student is denied an extension, they are considered an unlawful presence in the United States the day after the denial is issued, which means they can be forcibly removed. And once they are removed, they are barred from re-entry into the United States. So that's the current situation for our students. And you can imagine that that is having a very serious effect. We don't know if the duration of status will pass. We think my professional organizations think it's very likely. We also don't know all of the details. What I've said is what has been proposed. The effects of this cause instability for students. The inability for international student offices to fully respond is really challenging because we don't have the answers. We don't have resources. We don't know all that much. I'm having another meeting this week with with other colleagues, and an attorney is going to talk to us about potential effects of this, but we don't know, and the attorney also doesn't know. things we can do, and we do, we are surrounding the students with as much support as we can. So we maintain open communication with them. Any public communications go through our legal counsel, but we try to keep the students always informed about how to make sure they keep their status legal. We create supportive communities through offering safe spaces, fun events, excursions. We build community and trust as much as we're able to. We provide necessary guardrails and oversight and training and education so that students stay in compliance and are properly advised and don't inadvertently break any rules. This is not the time to break rules. We also are working hard to educate the campus community about issues that are affecting international students. For instance, we are talking to advisors about what classes they can and cannot take and how many classes they need. We talk to the campus community about what they can do with employment. And we have a really strong pre-arrival orientation, a peer mentor program that involves returning international students who my office trains to act as leaders and peer mentors. We have an open door policy, and we have an office cell phone with WhatsApp on it so they can reach out to us if they have an emergency or concern. Sometimes international students experience financial instability because of political issues or financial challenges in their home countries. In addition, we get students from parts of the world where wars break out, there are pandemics, natural disasters, financial crashes, or the students have losses or other challenges in their families. They can't go home because, like I said, they can't come back in if they leave. They're dealing with the complexities of being a college student in a foreign country, but also worried about the safety and health of their families at home. So it is especially difficult for us to address because we don't have a lot of resources, but Stockton is a welcoming community. And we do have some resources such as a food pantry on campus for emergencies. We work with student housing in the bursar's office to develop payment plans so that students don't fall behind. We have worked with the School of General Studies to provide tutoring for students who are struggling with English. And we're beginning to develop an English language program that we're hoping to launch next year. We have mental health counseling for students who need it. And the challenges in this work really come from the complexity of the academic, emotional, psychological, and financial situations in which our students find themselves. This is exacerbated by the changes in policies, lawsuits, the uncertainty, the lack of communication that we are all experiencing. We have to be here for students when they have a medical challenge, a mental health challenge, are struggling in classes, or have interpersonal issues. We have to remember that these are generally young people who are in the U.S., usually without their families, and we need to support them in ways that domestic students don't need. Like others in this group have said, we focus not on deficits, but on their wonderful contributions to our campus community. We celebrate their cultures, their multilingualism, and the wonderful cultural and academic enrichment they bring us. And we are still looking at more ways we can be supportive for our international students and celebrate them, and have been building stronger and stronger support networks for them. They genuinely make this campus better by their presence and their participation. They're leaders among our students, and they demonstrate a resilience that is really remarkable. But we have to make sure that we're here for them, supporting them, as this is not, as I said, an easy time for them. Thank you. That's really all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for providing that international viewpoint and reminding us what that work looks like and the issues that surround that work. We have one, I know we are falling behind, but we do have one fantastic final panelist. Her name is Jillian Ober. I'm so excited to have her here. Jillian Ober is the 2025-2026 New Jersey State Teacher of the Year, an educator currently working on her official sabbatical with the New Jersey Department of Education. With experience as an ESL teacher in a high-intensity multilingual learner setting, she has worked closely with newcomer students, students with interrupted formal education, and multilingual learners navigating complex academic, social, and emotional transitions. Her work centers on humanizing instruction, advocating for multilingual students and families, and helping educators build classrooms where students feel seen and valued and academically supported. She is also an adjunct professor at Monmouth University and Georgian Court University, where she supports future educators in developing asset-based, culturally responsive practices. Through her teaching, speaking, and statewide leadership, Ms. Ober continues to validate the experiences of multilingual learners and the educators who serve them. And she's tonight talking more closely about the impact this is having on educators and our mental health and some of the resources she's going to share in our Padlet. Thank you so much, Jillian.
Thank you so much. I'm going to try to do the expedited version of this a little bit just for everybody's time. But I just have to say, this has been so inspiring. It's just so great to be in a space where I'm learning new things, but also, affirming and confirming some things that I've really been trying to learn and research, over the past few years as, immigration presence and intimidation have increased in our state. So it's just been really wonderful to be here. But really, I kind of just wanted to ground my talk here in sort of a personal story, because I think while this year has been so exciting, being named, it's such a huge honor to be named the State Teacher of the Year. I kind of, I'm coming to this space where I want to share with people, because I think it's something that we're not talking enough about. Is I was really, because of what was happening with my students in my classroom in the fall before I left my classroom, I was really struggling with my mental health. I was sort of at this crossroads where I had this huge, exciting opportunity, but I was feeling this extreme guilt that I was leaving my students behind. I had students whose parents were being taken off the streets. I had a student who I had known since third grade. I'd watched her basically grow up. And her mother had to make the decision that because her father was taken, they could no longer stay here. They couldn't afford on a one-parent income to provide for, her brothers and sisters. And this student who had worked so hard in her English journey, and she'd grown into this amazing middle schooler, had to leave and return to a country that she didn't really know anymore. So I think some resources and some things that I've been in some of my work at the Department of Education, and then, just having this amazing experience of getting to go around our state and talk to different educators and hear from people going through these similar situations, is just we need some resources as educators to deal with this trauma, because it's trauma for us as well. I had the pleasure of attending it's called Insight Manville. It's hosted at Manville High School. And I went to a session in the morning that was specifically centered on grief, and a support group called Good Grief was there. And they were talking about how, this losing someone to deportation, to family separation, a student not coming back to your classroom, is a type of grief. And, I just think one morning I got to school, and all I had was an email in my inbox saying that so-and-so was unenrolled. I had no answers. I could fill in the gaps because of the relationship I had built with that family about what had happened. But it was like that student was gone, and we're kind of just left to pick up the pieces. And I think especially as a white woman in this space, it's something I'm also reflecting on, because I cannot imagine, I am not a member of a community that is dealing with the intimidation from ICE. I'm not someone that this is affecting on a personal level. So especially for educators that are part of the immigrant community, that are part of the Latinx community, I think we have to do a little bit more to provide resources for when you're kind of going through a crisis. I think we've all had those moments where, you feel like, am I doing enough? Like, we've all lied awake at night thinking about that student or where they are or what's happening. So some resources that I found and things that I really would I just love to share out is I wish I had these when I was going through those moments where I didn't really know how to process what was happening, where I felt like I didn't have answers about, where my student had gone, what their family was dealing with, or how I could help, or my feelings of not doing enough. I am going to share the links in the chat really quick. But I think these are two great resources that can serve as a starting point, because I think when I was in those moments of kind of having a mental health crisis, and I feel like it's, to acknowledge something, you have to say it out loud. And I feel like I am certainly probably not the only educator experiencing this. And I wish I had resources in those moments to talk to a therapist or somebody that is specifically trained to work with teachers, because I think this is also a really unique position that we're in, and it's a unique sort of burden on our mental health. So through NJEA, it's called Aid NJEA, you can basically get free counseling sessions that are specifically led by therapists trained to work with educators. And I think that piece is really important because they're trained to recognize signs of burnout. They're trained to, help teachers that are navigating these very things in their classroom. And then the second resource is called the Employee Assistant Program. And both of these services are not necessarily like, you're going to find your long-term therapist, but I think they provide a few sessions to sort of address the issue that you're going through. And then these people are trained to help connect you with more resources, to help connect you maybe with a program or a counselor that can help you continue to navigate whatever you're going through. And I just think that this is something, we all care so much. Every single person that's spoken tonight, everyone that's been involved in listening, taking the time to come to a panel like this, we care deeply, but you can't show up and continue to care for your students if you're not caring for yourself. I think it's really hard to pour from an empty cup. So I think just encouraging this conversation of we have to check in on ourselves, check in on our own mental health, because this is so much to be navigating. Like being a teacher is hard enough, and navigating this space where our students are dealing with significant trauma, where it's changing their physical health and their mental health, it's only natural that we're going to also feel the repercussions of that. So just sort of naming that there are resources out there, and I wish it was something that was talked about a little bit more. So I'm trying to use my platform a bit to talk about this. And I think those two links are a really great starting point. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jillian, and for being our final panelist, and rightfully so, really contextualizing everything in tonight's discussion. Here is a QR code for the Padlet resources. Thank you again to all the panelists who spoke this evening, but I also want to thank NJTESOL-NJBE for being the platform to do this. And Dr. Worley and I really do appreciate that opportunity. You will also see my email here. You can certainly email me. This will be available on the NJTESOL-NJBE website, the PowerPoint, the information, and certainly the YouTube video for this evening. So thank you so much to everyone again. I've learned so much, and I really appreciate this, and I hope we continue the conversation and sustain this as we go forward. Thank you so much.